the number one thing I want to talk about is why you should care about bias. So initially I was going to talk about something similar like cycling or like cheddar cheese or anything like that, but I wanted to talk about something we could all relate to and something that we could all hopefully learn from. So why I care about bias personally, I like reading the news, I like staying up to date with a lot of information, or the stock market even, and government. And when you're processing lots of information, it's really important to be able to weed out like certain impurities of that information, because I'm just assuming all of you guys know what bias is, right? And even like writers of the most esteemed news sources would have bias to them. So it's really important to be able to weed that out. But even if you don't do a lot of reading, it's still really important to be able to identify bias, because imagine you're asking your friend for some advice. You need to be able to weed out what your friend is saying that's not 100% true, or something that they came up with logically. So if you go on Google, you're going to see about like 30 or 40 types of different bias. You can see there's confirmation, attribution bias, all those kind of things. But for the sake of your understanding and the simplicity of this TED Talk, I gave two large umbrella terms to different types of bias. I gave defensive bias and offensive bias, and you're not going to see either of these terms on the internet. So these are stuff that I personally made up on myself, so don't like fact check me on that, you know. Offensive bias is something new though. That's something that I personally introduced based on personal experience, and they may or may not exist outside like the psychology world or whatever, but the reason why I wanted to structure them into defensive and offensive is because I feel like there's just too many labels. I think when I was doing research, at least, psychology professors, like, you know, much like business professors, need to get tenure, right? So I feel like they need to make a lot of information, or are incentivized to. So to talk about the first type of bias, defensive bias, this basically occurs when someone's opinion is changed because they're trying to defend themselves. So they are the victim, and they could be defending anything about themselves. It could be how the world sees them, or more importantly and more commonly, how they see the world. So let me give you an example, because it's really hard to talk about what it is without an example. Let's say you think ginger is really good for weight loss. You know, you've read a lot of articles that tell you ginger is like some superfood, and everybody and their mom is saying how good it is to your health. If you see an article that tells you ginger is not good for weight loss, you're probably going to view it with less validity, because you've seen so much information, but also because you're kind of defending your view on ginger. Because in order to be able to view that new negative article about ginger in a more rational light, you need to be able to be open to change your opinion about ginger. And people are not very ready to change. A lot of people don't like change. But it's not just that shallow. A lot of times it goes much deeper than that. And I want to give an example as to how defensive bias could be really bad for the world too. So in 2008, a UK university did a study where they presented a case of sexual assault to a group of participants and listeners who were both men and women. And this was male on female rape. The men who analyzed the case were more likely to sympathize with the rapist and blame the female victim, and vice versa for women. Women were more likely to sympathize with the victim and blame the rapist. And you think that's the more rational take, right? Obviously, you wouldn't want to sympathize with a criminal. But they found out that because men have more in common with the rapist, they're both males, subconsciously you're trying to defend your social group of which you are a part of, because you want your social group to be perceived better by outsiders or women, for example. And of course, this gets worse as you age. So if you know any grandparents or any old people in your life and you try to convince them of something or try to change their mind, it's probably going to be very hard, because they've held on to that information for so long. They don't want to let go. That's why old people are often seen or stereotyped as stubborn and closed-minded. So the next type of bias I want to talk about is offensive bias. And offensive bias is something that I made up on my own. You're not going to see this on Google or anything like that. And this is the main point of my talk. This is something that I really want you guys to listen out for, because it's something that a lot of people have, and it can be really bad for their lives, I think. So essentially what offensive bias is when your opinion is skewed or changed because you want to be seen as better or a certain way. So you're not defending yourself, but you want to be seen a certain way. I'll give an example. The first way that this could happen, and there's two ways by the way. The first way that this could happen is someone with a very large ego, for example. Imagine this, you're in a friend group, you guys are talking, and one guy says something, or another person says something that just disagrees with the first person. Not because they really logically disagree, but just for the sake of disagreeing, you know, playing the devil's advocate. And a lot of people do this because it makes them feel like they have a more unique opinion, or they're going against the group status quo. And, you know, subconsciously they're winning some kind of argument or something. Or a lot of people would call it being a dick. So this is something I want you guys to look out for in your friends and yourself. And the second way that offensive bias comes to be is something I call the boomerang effect. And the boomerang effect occurs when somebody's trying to make a change, and they really overdo it because they fixate on the change more than what you're actually changing into. So I'll give an example. Imagine Eric, for example, grows up in a very messy household. I'm not saying you do, but you know, imagine he does. As soon as he has the money for his own place, it's likely going to be very minimalist. If you go to Eric's house, you may say, why don't you have any decoration, right? But maybe decoration reminds him of his past, you know? And he wants to distance himself from that. Or more commonly, imagine politically I align with party A, right? I've been voting party A all my life, right? And then I make a change over to party B, you know, times change, you know, my political views change or whatever. I'm going to associate that move with maturing. So I'm gonna want to move more into party B because I think I'm maturing by moving into party B. Not because I'm just agreeing more with their policies, but because I want to distance myself from the past, and the new is novel, it's exciting. So when a lot of people adopt a new hobby or adopt a new mindset or change their opinion about something, a lot of people tend to overdo it because it becomes a very novel thing. It's exciting to change for them. So these are some key takeaways of my presentation. Basically, you want to be very conscious of your own biases. I gave this talk because I think it's really important to be aware of yourself. And if you're able to identify bias, it's really easy to have a much more logical way of thinking. I actually didn't know how to do this, but I will connect it back to the course. In the workplace, bias is really prominent and can be really detrimental to the workplace. For example, this is business leadership. If you are a business leader, you have to be able to identify your own biases, because a lot of people, for example, get promoted because of a certain way they, you know, are perceived, not logically, but because of internal biases. And there's lots of labels for it. I'm not going to get really into that, but if you ever work as a business leader or just in a corporate environment, it's really important to look out for biases. And secondly, for those around you, so you want to apply the same kind of thinking to your friends, family, etc. Yeah, that's basically it. Thank you very much for listening.